The apartment was cold, not just from the creeping November wind that slid in through the gaps of the windows, but from the kind of silence that settles when you've run out of reasons to pretend everything is okay. I was sitting in my armchair, the one I got secondhand from a neighbor who moved away, with my knees tucked to my chest and a chipped mug of tea warming my palms. The world outside was all muted gray, like even the sky didn't want to be here. A snowstorm was coming. I could feel it in my bones before it even touched the ground. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days, until my phone lit up. Robert, not Dad, on the screen anymore. Just Robert, a man I once believed would protect me at any cost. My breath caught, my stomach flipped. For a second, a foolish second, I thought maybe he was calling to say he missed me. To say, "We're setting a place for you, Claire." Instead, his voice came through the speaker like a blade hidden behind a smile. "Claire, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a sentence, a dismissal, casual, hollow, like telling me we were out of milk. I froze, the tea burned my fingers, but I didn't move. "I'm sorry." "What? It's just better if you stayed put. You know how Chloe gets. She's been sensitive lately. We want to keep things peaceful." There it was again, Chloe, the golden child, the self-declared artist, the walking storm that everyone else had to adjust their lives around. And once again, they were asking me to make myself small so she could feel big. I placed the mug down, hard. The sound of ceramic on wood cracked through the silence like thunder. "So, I'm not welcome because Chloe might get anxious?" "Don't make this dramatic," he sighed, tired already. "It's just one day. Just one day." As if the calendar made it less cruel. As if exiling your daughter for the comfort of another could ever be minimized to just one day. I stood up, my legs trembled, not from rage, not yet, but from the kind of grief that feels like humiliation. "You say that like I haven't been sending money since January. Like I didn't send $4,800 so you and Mom wouldn't freeze. Like I don't skip meals to pay bills that aren't even mine." He paused. Silence. That same, stretched silence they always hide behind when they don't have a real answer. "Claire, don't bring money into this. You offered." I cut him off with a laugh so bitter it felt like something cracked in my throat. "I offered? Was it an offer when you called me at midnight in January saying the furnace died and Mom was crying? Was it an offer when I paid the repairman in March? When Chloe blew her savings on that podcast fantasy and couldn't cover the oil bill? Was that just me being generous again?" "Claire, no," I hissed. "It's fine. I get it now. I'm good enough to pay for the heat, but not good enough to sit at your damn table." I wish I could say I cried. That I felt something noble or poetic. But what I felt in that moment was shame. Not for what I'd done, but for how little it mattered. For how replaceable I'd always been. So I whispered, cold and sharp, "Don't expect another cent from me. This winter, you can keep your peace. And I'll keep my dignity." Then I hung up, not angrily, not dramatically, just finally. The screen went black, and so did the space where hope used to live. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall, quiet, indifferent, much like them. Have you ever been pushed aside for someone else's comfort? Share your story below. You're not alone, and your voice deserves to be heard. If this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of people who are done being silent. After I hung up that call, I sat in the dark for hours. Not because I didn't know what to do next, but because I suddenly realized I had spent the last 2 winters giving everything, to people who saw my help as background noise. They never said thank you. Not once. I remember the first time it happened. January, last year. The call came in just past midnight. Robert was frantic, said the heat had died, that Diane was coughing, and the walls were frosting from the inside. He sounded afraid, desperate, like the house itself had turned on them. So I wired $600 immediately. I didn't hesitate. I didn't even think about rent or groceries. I just moved, like instinct. No one called the next day. No one said they were warm again. No one said my name. In March, it was the furnace. Diane was in tears this time, whispering that she couldn't bear to hear the metal groan and clank anymore. That it felt like the house was dying around her. So I researched the best service company in town, called them myself, scheduled the repair, and covered the entire cost, another $850. Still no thank you, just silence, just expectation. And then in September, Chloe blew what little savings she had left on that ridiculous podcast startup. some half-baked idea about empowering creatives through authentic storytelling. She ordered thousands of candles from some wholesale factory in Texas, slapped on cheap labels, and tried to market them as handmade art. No one bought them. The garage overflowed with boxes that stank of paraffin. Robert just shook his head and muttered, "She's young, she'll learn." Diane covered for her, again, saying, "At least she's trying something." Meanwhile, guess who paid for the heating oil that month? Me. Again. And the worst part, I never even questioned it. I had started to believe that was just my role. The invisible provider, the emergency backup plan with a pulse, a wallet wearing a name. They never asked how I was doing. Never wondered why I worked back-to-back shifts loading boxes at the distribution center. Never noticed when I started skipping dinners to make room in my budget. There was this one time, I remember it so vividly. I was at the grocery store in line, holding nothing but a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. And my card declined, twice. The cashier gave me a look that split my pride down the middle. I told her I'd be right back. I walked out and sat on the curb outside that store in the snow, staring at my phone, and there it was, a payment confirmation, $400 transferred to the Morgans. The same day, automatically, like clockwork. I laughed, right there on the sidewalk. Not because it was funny, but because something inside me, some last shred of self-respect, finally cracked. And yet, they never asked. They never said, "Claire, how are you holding up?" Never said, "Do you need anything?" Because I wasn't a daughter to them anymore. I was a utility. Chloe was the one they invited to family dinners. She got a seat at the table. Even when she failed, even when she lied, even when she drained every ounce of stability from our parents. And me, I got invoices. I got voicemails. I got a front row seat to being erased by people who used to hold me when I cried as a child. They say family is unconditional, but I've learned that in some homes, love comes with strings, strings you're never allowed to cut, even when they're strangling you. And what hurt the most wasn't the money. It was the silence. It was realizing that you can give everything you have, your time, your energy, your peace, and still be treated like a temporary solution, a burden waiting to expire. That's why when Robert told me not to come for Thanksgiving, it wasn't just a rejection. It was a confirmation that I had never really been wanted, just used, and used up. Have you ever felt like your worth in a family was measured by what you could give, and not who you are? Leave a comment below, tell your story. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone. And if this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button, because we're building something here, a space for people who finally said, enough. You matter, even if they never said it. And maybe, just maybe, that truth is the beginning of your freedom. There wasn't a single sound when I clicked that button. No fireworks, no dramatic thunder, not even the satisfying ping you might expect when breaking something that was long overdue to shatter. Just silence. November 2nd, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. That was the day I officially ended the heating oil service for 422 Elm Street, the house I grew up in. The house I had kept warm with my own 2 hands, with my own hard-earned dollars. No warning, no explanations, just a quiet, final click. It didn't feel victorious, not right away. It felt empty, hollow, almost like I had severed a part of my own body, a phantom limb that had been aching for far too long. A limb everyone else leaned on, until it bruised and cracked beneath the weight. I sat at the table long after that. The screen of my laptop had gone dark, but my thoughts didn't. They were loud, louder than they'd ever been. You just abandoned them. What if they can't survive the winter? What if this makes you heartless? But then, another voice, smaller, but clearer, whispered back, "What if you finally did something for yourself?" I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the storm that wasn't outside. But inside me, that gnawing, twisting tension between guilt and clarity, between shame and long overdue strength. Because that's the thing they don't tell you about reclaiming your life. It doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes, it feels like betrayal, even when you're the one who's been betrayed all along. Later that night, I stood by the window with a cup of mint tea in my hands. Outside, the sky was painted steel gray, the kind of sky that makes you pull your sweater tighter. Snow hadn't started falling yet, but I knew it was coming. I could smell it, I could feel it in my teeth. And all I could think about was that house. The thin windows, the old pipes, the radiator that rattled like a dying breath. I thought of Diane, my mother, curled up on the couch, probably with 3 blankets and a migraine. I thought of Robert, pacing the hallway, muttering about the cost of oil like it was some outside curse and not something I'd been covering for years. I even thought of Chloe, probably upstairs in that lavender-painted room, scrolling through Instagram, posting something like, "Nothing like cold weather and cinnamon lattes," completely oblivious to how the heat had vanished, just like the sister she helped push away. And in that moment, something sharp inside me softened, not because I forgave them, but because I was finally letting go of the need to be forgiven. The next morning, the city was covered in white. Snow had arrived overnight, quiet, heavy, final, the same way I had chosen to leave. I made oatmeal and ate in silence. The heater in my apartment hummed like a lullaby I didn't know I needed. A kind of warmth that didn't come with conditions or guilt trips. I opened my email and saw the confirmation again. "Your service cancellation request has been processed. No further payments will be billed." I stared at that line for longer than I cared to admit. Not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to remember this feeling. The moment I stopped rescuing people who had no intention of holding my hand when I was drowning. It took 4 days for the messages to begin. The first came from Diane. "Claire, the thermostat's acting strange. Could you take a look?" I didn't respond. A day later, Chloe, in her usual tone. Wow, so immature. No greeting, no punctuation, just judgment, like always. By day 7, Robert was calling. I let it ring. The voicemail buzzed in seconds. "Claire, if you know anything about what's going on with the heating, we need to talk. It's already 58 degrees in here." I didn't even play it all the way through. I just sat back, turned on my little space heater, and read a novel I bought from the used bookstore last weekend. A story about a woman who left everything behind and learned how to breathe again. The parallels were almost insulting. I wasn't rejoicing in their discomfort, but I wasn't losing sleep over it, either, because they had always expected me to be the cushion, the patch, the fixer of what they kept breaking. And now that I had removed myself from the cycle, they finally noticed, but not me, just the absence of their comfort. Guilt still came, in waves, like a ghost tugging at my sweater sleeve. What if Mom gets sick? What if Dad has to pawn something valuable? What if Chloe finally realizes what she's done? But each time, the guilt was chased away by a louder question. When was the last time they asked how you were doing? Claire, when was the last time they cared if I ate? If I slept? If I was warm? The answers echoed through the room like an old song I used to love, but now couldn't bear to hear. That night, I lit a candle, one I bought for myself, not one of Chloe's failed business attempts. It smelled like sandalwood and orange peel. I wrapped myself in a knit blanket, sat by the window, and whispered a truth that no one else had ever offered me. You are not cruel for protecting yourself. Let me say that again, in case someone listening right now needs to hear it louder. You are not cruel for protecting yourself. Even if they call it selfish, even if they call it abandonment, even if they say, "But we're family," because love without regard is not love. It's ownership, and I don't belong to anyone anymore. The cold had finally arrived. Not just the chill in the air, or the frost kissing the windows. No, this was a different kind of cold. A deeper, hollower, more echoing silence that seeped into the cracks of everything they'd once taken for granted. The thermostat at 422 Elm Street began its slow decline. And unlike every other year, there was no last-minute transfer from me. No rescue, no lifeline, only silence. The kind of silence that used to terrify me, now felt like armor. It started with a message from Diane. "Claire, it's down to 50 degrees. The heater isn't working right. Your dad won't wear a coat. And Chloe has been coughing nonstop. Can you call the oil company for us? No, hello, no, I'm sorry. No, we shouldn't have pushed you away." Just the same old tone of expectation, of urgency wrapped in entitlement. I didn't respond. Instead, I stirred the soup on my stove, potato and celery. Warm, fragrant, mine, and watched the windows fog gently under the heat of my little kitchen. That night, my phone buzzed 5 times in a row. I didn't check it, not because I didn't care, but because I was learning. Slowly, painfully. That caring doesn't mean sacrificing yourself until you vanish. Caring doesn't mean becoming invisible. The next morning, Robert called. I let it ring, and ring, until the voicemail clicked in. His voice was clipped, that familiar blend of anger and control. "Claire, this isn't a game. It's 46 in here. Your mother has a fever. Chloe's locked herself in her room and refuses to talk to anyone. If you know what's going on with the heating, you need to call me. Now." I stared at the screen. "You need to call me. It was never a request, never concern, always demand, even when they were the ones who had exiled me like an afterthought. I closed the message, turned my phone face down, and for the first time in years, I felt no rush of panic, no racing heart, no pressure in my chest begging me to fix it. Because I finally realized, it wasn't my mess to clean anymore. Later that day, Chloe posted a story on social media. A photo of her feet in thick socks, captioned, "Cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." I stared at the screen for a long while, not because I was hurt, not even surprised, but because I had seen this pattern my whole life. She had always performed discomfort to gain sympathy, not from the people she hurt, but from strangers who didn't know the full story. And part of me wanted to reply, to post the receipts, to scream the truth loud enough for everyone to hear. But instead, I just shut the app and put on a jazz record I hadn't listened to since college. Something about the saxophone that night made me feel less alone. On November 21st, Diane called again. Her voice shook this time. "Claire, it's 40 in the house. Your dad's sleeping in his winter coat on the couch. My fingers are so cold I can't even wash the dishes. Please, can you do something?" I was at the stove again, flipping grilled cheese, the room glowing orange from the oven's warmth. My apartment, small and imperfect, was filled with the scent of butter and toasted bread. And I thought, this peace, this quiet, this is what they never let me have. Because in that house, I was never allowed to be still. I was always the one plugging the leaks, holding the roof, covering the silence with effort. Now, the roof was cracking without me. And I didn't move. They called again on November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving. "Robert, this time, more forceful. Claire, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it." I froze mid-slice, the knife hovering over the onion on my cutting board. His words echoed through the kitchen like a slap. Now's the time to prove it. As if the $8,000 I had quietly poured into their comfort wasn't proof. As if every late-night shift, every skipped meal, every ignored health scare I endured to keep their house warm was nothing. As if my value only returned when they were uncomfortable again. I set the knife down gently, and I whispered out loud, "To no one. I've already proven enough. I just finally stopped waiting for them to notice." That night, I sat on the floor with a blanket around my shoulders, a cup of tea in hand, and watched the snow fall like ashes outside my window. The wind howled through the city like it was mourning something. And maybe I was, too, not for them, but for the version of me who would have answered, who would have broken herself again for the sake of peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace. It's imprisonment, and I wasn't a prisoner anymore. Have you ever chosen silence, not because you didn't care, but because you finally cared about yourself? Share your story in the comments. You never know who needs your voice tonight. And if you've ever been the one who held everyone together until there was nothing left of you, hit that subscribe button. This space is for us, the quiet, the forgotten, the finally free. Thanksgiving morning was still and white. No cars, no footsteps, no noise, just wind scraping across rooftops like a memory that wouldn't die. I was wrapped in a blanket, cradling a warm cup of coffee, letting the steam fog up the window I hadn't wiped in days. The quiet wasn't empty, it was earned. For once, I wasn't cooking for anyone. No turkey, no mashed potatoes, no hollow small talk to fill the air between people who didn't really see me. Just toast, peanut butter, and the peace of finally existing without needing to prove I deserved to. And then the doorbell rang. It was sharp, insistent, not like someone dropping off mail. No, this was someone demanding to be heard. I knew who it was before I even moved. I walked to the peephole, heart steady, breath calm, just as I suspected. Robert, my father. He stood there bundled in a thick gray coat, eyes bloodshot from cold and frustration, lips slightly parted as he exhaled into the wind. His breath fogged around him like smoke rising from something that had long since burned out. I opened the door a sliver. Warm air spilled out into the hallway. He blinked as it hit his face. The contrast must have been brutal. "Claire," he said, voice brittle, "we need to talk." I didn't step back. I didn't invite him in. I leaned against the frame, fingers still curled around the doorknob. "I don't think today's the right day." He clenched his jaw. His next words dropped like stones. "You cut the heat." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "The house is freezing. Your mom's sick. Chloe won't come out of her room. It's 38 degrees inside." I met his gaze, not flinching. "I didn't cut anything. I just stopped paying. Those are two very different things." He looked stunned for a moment. Then, defensive. You know we're not good with all that tech stuff. The account was under your name. The company never notified us. You mean, the same company I called every single month, for 2 years, on your behalf, with my money. His eyes narrowed. He shifted uncomfortably in his boots. Claire, this isn't about the past. We're in trouble. We've sold almost everything worth anything. Your grandfather's watches, gone. Just to get a few days worth of heating oil. But it ran out. You sold Frank's watches? My voice cracked, not with softness, with rage. Those watches weren't worth millions, but they were his legacy. He'd worn one every day since I was a child, and they sold them like junk, because they had finally run out of me. You could have asked, I said, voice low, but you didn't. You didn't call to apologize. You didn't come here weeks ago, when the first signs showed. You waited until the cold broke your walls and your pride. He exhaled through his nose. Defensive, again, always. Don't make this more complicated than it is. Chloe's been going through a lot. Diane's not well. It's been a tough year. I let out a bitter laugh. Tough? You think I don't know tough? I've lived in a freezing apartment too. I've worked double shifts so Mom could afford her medications. I've skipped groceries to pay your heating oil while Chloe bought $7 lattes and posted them online like she was living some indie dream. He opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to lie, but I kept going. I stayed quiet when Chloe wasted all your savings on candles no one wanted. I stayed quiet when you asked me to understand, and be patient, and don't make a fuss for the sake of peace. But when it came time for the one thing that mattered to me, sitting at that damn Thanksgiving table, you told me not to come. His eyes dropped. The first crack in his voice appeared. It wasn't meant to be permanent. But it was, Dad, because every time you chose her comfort over my presence, you made it permanent. Every time you sighed when I stood up for myself. Every time you told me I was too sensitive. Every time you watched me break my back financially and still acted like I was the problem when I asked to be seen. I stepped out just enough that he could see inside. The heater, the glow of my small kitchen, the neatly folded blanket on the couch. The world I had built with no help, no acknowledgement, just quiet, determined survival. I don't owe you anymore, I said, and I'm not coming back to that role. I'm not the daughter who fixes everything. I'm not the family's last resort. I stopped being your safety net the moment you told me my presence wasn't worth the risk of Chloe's mood. He swallowed. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked old. We were wrong, he whispered, but we didn't know how to fix it. Then maybe, I said, you shouldn't have broken it so easily. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there for a long moment, nodding once, and then turned away. His boots crunched in the snow like broken glass. I closed the door. The lock clicked like punctuation. A full stop at the end of a very long sentence I had spent my entire adult life trying to write. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't even sigh. I just stood still, holding the knob, listening to the wind howl outside, and thinking, sometimes the people who made the fire die out are the ones who still expect you to light it again. But I wasn't their matchstick anymore. I was my own flame. Have you ever had to shut the door on someone who once called you family? Not out of hatred, but because silence was the only way to survive? Tell your truth in the comments. I'm not here to judge, I'm here to listen. Because I know what it's like to be the one they only call when everything's broken. And if you've ever felt invisible at your own family's table, hit subscribe. This space is for us, the ones who finally said, no more. It was early December when she came. The city was buried in snow, the kind that swallowed sounds and slowed even the most hurried steps. Minneapolis sat under a white hush, and the world outside my window felt like it had paused, not for peace, but for surrender. I was folding a wool scarf fresh from the drying rack when the doorbell rang. At first, I didn't move. I assumed it was a delivery, something small I'd forgotten I ordered, or maybe a neighbor. But then the knock came, steady, hesitant, human in a way that made my chest seize before I could even think. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and there she was, Diane, my mother, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, a scarf clumsily tied around her neck. Snow crusting on her shoulders like she'd stood there too long. Her hands clutched an old handbag to her chest. Her breath came out in pale bursts. And her eyes, they weren't angry or demanding. They were lost. I opened the door just a crack. Just enough for the heat to spill out and remind her that somewhere in this building, someone had made it. Mom, her voice was almost a whisper. Claire, I'm sorry for coming unannounced. I didn't know how much longer I could wait. I didn't say anything. I didn't invite her in. I leaned against the frame, the way I had with Robert. My hands steady, my heart, not so much. "Why are you here?" She coughed lightly, drawing in a shaky breath. I took the bus, then walked from the station. It took a while. There was a silence between us then. Not cruel, not cold, just full of things neither of us could say without crumbling. She looked down at the tiled threshold, snow melting around her boots. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about Thanksgiving, about all the winters before, about you." I swallowed the lump in my throat but didn't move. I realized, her voice cracked, and for once, she didn't try to smooth it over. I realized I was wrong, not just for telling you not to come, but for all the times I let you carry everything, and treated it like that was just your role. She looked up at me. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my mother without armor. "No, we were just trying to help Chloe. No, you're the strong one. No, you'll understand someday." Just a woman standing in the snow, trying to make her way back through a door she'd spent years walking away from. "Chloe regrets it too," she continued. "She says, things never should have gotten this far. She told me last night that you don't owe anyone anything. Not anymore." I let out a small laugh. Dry, hollow. "Too late, Mom. Everyone only says I don't owe them anything after I stop giving. After everything collapsed, suddenly I matter." She nodded, accepting the blow without flinching. "That's fair." Her eyes shimmered with the beginning of tears. "I'm not here to ask you to come back, or fix anything. I just want you to know I see it now. I see you now, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't stand beside you when you needed me." I opened the door a little wider, not to invite her in, but to let her feel it. The warmth, the quiet, the safety I had built from the ashes of their silence. "I'm not angry anymore," I said softly, "but I'm not who I was. I'm not the last brick holding up the house. I've stopped doing that." She nodded again, her lips quivered. "I understand." We stood there like that, separated by a doorway and decades of damage. Nothing else moved, not the wind, not the snow, only the grief between us shifting, from fresh pain to old ache. And then she turned, her steps crunching into the whiteness. I watched her shrink into the street, bundled, tired, a little broken, but less blind than before. And I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel satisfaction, just relief. Because this time, I didn't let the apology pull me back into duty. I didn't sprint into the freezing storm with a blanket and a solution. I simply let her leave. That night, I sat in the corner of my apartment with a book in my lap and a mug of cinnamon tea warming my palms. I stared into the little fireplace, the flames gentle, rhythmic, kind, and I thought about forgiveness. It doesn't always look like hugging someone and telling them it's okay. Sometimes, forgiveness is choosing not to carry it anymore. Not the blame, not the hope, not the weight of someone else's healing. I didn't hate Diane. In some small, quiet way, I was even glad she came. But I also knew, even if they offered every apology in the world, I wouldn't go back, because I had found peace. And I would protect it, even if it meant protecting it from them. Have you ever forgiven someone not because they deserved it, but because you deserved peace? Share your truth in the comments, I promise. You're not alone in this. And if this story touched something buried in you, if you've ever stood in a doorway, holding the warmth back from someone who finally noticed the cold, hit subscribe. This space is for the brave ones who walked away without slamming the door. It was the first week of December when Rachel called. The snow outside had turned gray, trampled by boots and tires. No longer soft or beautiful, just heavy, like a season that had stayed too long. I was folding laundry when the phone rang, not expecting anything, not hoping, but when I saw her name on the screen, something inside me leaned closer. I answered. "Claire," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "I just talked to Aunt Claire. Things at your house, they're worse than I thought." I sat down, still holding a warm sweater in my hands. "Tell me." The story poured out in broken pieces. Chloe had moved out, or rather, she had been pushed out. Her boyfriend had broken up with her just days after Thanksgiving, citing her emotional instability and lack of direction. That's how he put it. Rachel said, almost clinical, as if he had spent months trying to fix her before finally giving up. She crashed at a friend's place for a few days, then another, then another. Now, she was sleeping on someone's couch in Eden Prairie, with no plan, no job, and no clue how to move forward. And yet, instead of reaching out in humility, she went online. "She's telling everyone you abandoned her." Rachel said flatly. She posted a crying video. Said her only sibling turned her back when the family needed her most. I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because none of it surprised me. This was Chloe's way, always had been. Spin the story, center herself, deflect the blame. I used to be furious at that, the way she twisted every truth to make herself the victim. But now I just felt tired. Exhaustion that lived in the marrow. What about Robert and Diane? I asked. Rachel hesitated. They're staying in a roadside motel near Highway 52. One of those weekly rentals with paper-thin walls and broken heaters. I heard Diane's got a mild case of pneumonia. She's coughing constantly, but they can't afford a doctor. I closed my eyes. I could picture it too clearly. My mother curled under 3 threadbare blankets, shaking. My father pacing the cramped room, angry not at the consequences, but at how powerless he had become to avoid them. They had sold Frank's watches. They had sold the house. They couldn't keep up with the property tax. Rachel continued, and the utilities piled up. They listed it last week. A local investor snapped it up in a day. Dirt cheap, the kind of deal that only happens when people are desperate. My throat tightened. That house. I could still smell the wood polish on the banister. Still see the spot where the wallpaper peeled in the hallway. Still feel the faint warmth of memories that, even though they hurt, had once made me feel like I belonged somewhere. And now, it was gone. Are you okay? Rachel asked softly, sensing my silence. I stared at the laundry in my lap, then out the window, where wind pushed snow in angry swirls. I'm okay, I said, just sad. Sad that they lost everything? I shook my head, sad that it took losing everything for them to realize I was there all along. I made tea that night, stronger than usual, sat on the windowsill, wrapped in my softest blanket, and let the storm roll in. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, stillness, not joy, not triumph, not even vengeance, just the silence that comes when you no longer carry what was never yours to hold. The days that followed were quiet. I didn't hear from Chloe. Not directly, anyway, but I saw her, scrolling through my feed. She was hard to miss. A photo of her bundled in layers, standing next to a borrowed space heater. Some families just know how to destroy you. A vague caption, no names, just enough to harvest sympathy without facing truth. In the comments, people rallied around her, sending love. Family is overrated anyway. You deserve better. And I didn't respond, because some stories don't need correction, they collapse on their own. Rachel kept updating me. Every call, every detail, it painted a picture of a family unraveling. Robert had tried to apply for emergency energy assistance, but was denied. Too many missed deadlines. Too little documentation. Diane, too sick to function, had withdrawn completely. Rachel said she just stared at the motel TV all day, like someone waiting for a past that wasn't coming back. And Chloe? Still drifting, still blaming, still pretending she was somehow wrong by the only person who had ever quietly saved them all. I didn't hate them. I want to say that clearly. I didn't sit there hoping they'd suffer. I didn't toast to their downfall. But I also didn't reach out. Because this wasn't punishment. This was what it looks like when consequences arrive and the person you used to lean on is finally gone. One night, I dreamed of the old house. It was empty, echoing. The lights didn't work. The furniture was covered in white sheets. I walked through it slowly, feeling the air growing colder with each step. When I reached the kitchen, I saw the table, still set for 4, but only one chair had a plate. Mine, and no one was there. I woke up crying, not because I missed them, but because I had finally stopped believing they'd ever meet me at that table again. Have you ever watched someone lose everything and still blamed you because you wouldn't save them again? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell your truth. Your voice matters here, even if it never mattered there. And if this story reminds you of a wound you were never allowed to speak aloud, hit subscribe. You're not alone, and you don't have to carry it in silence anymore. January came in quietly. No grand resolutions, no promises to start fresh. Just the steady rhythm of snow falling on rooftops and my own breathing, finally steady. Finally mine. I didn't hear from Diane. No generic New Year's greeting. No guild-laced check-ins. No, how are you? Masked as, we need you again. The silence wasn't loud anymore. It was liberating. I started my mornings the same way I always had, only now. Without waiting. No longer did I wake up and instinctively check for messages, for missed calls, for any sign that I was needed, wanted, or remembered. I woke up for me. I made coffee for me. I sliced oranges the way I like them, thin, delicate, arranged like petals. I played jazz records from my thrift store collection, letting saxophones hum through the walls like gentle reminders. You're allowed to be here. I worked my shifts at the distribution center, not out of desperation, but with pride, because every dollar earned was mine. Not redirected, not sacrificed, not spent before it even reached my account. I stopped at the corner bakery on Wednesdays, the one with the flaky apple tarts and too strong espresso. I read novels while crumbs gathered on my sleeves. I learned to knit, badly. I learned to sit still, beautifully. I no longer postponed my peace. I lived it, quietly, deliberately, entirely. The apartment stayed warm through the worst cold snaps. My little heater worked overtime, but never once complained, unlike those I used to help. And somehow, that mattered. To have something in my life that gave back warmth without asking for blood in return. I would lie in bed some nights and stare at the ceiling. Not with dread, not with grief, but with the stillness that comes after a storm that lasted too many years. I did think about them. Robert, with his pride. Diane, with her silence. Chloe, with her stories, all curated for the world, but never for truth. I thought about their motel room. The wheezing heater, the hollow-eyed exhaustion, the realization that the backup plan was gone, and they never had a contingency. I didn't smile at the thought. I didn't ache, either. I just let it be a fact. Like the snow outside, unchangeable, cold, but no longer mine to carry. Some nights, I dreamed of that old kitchen. The chipped tile, the crooked faucet, the table I once begged to be seen at. In those dreams, the house is always cold. But I'm not inside. I'm standing outside the window, watching them eat without me. Only now, I don't press my hand against the glass. I don't knock, I just turn around and walk away. And when I wake, there is no sorrow. Only a quiet kind of strength that says, I saved myself. Rachel still calls sometimes. We talk about books, about work, about life after survival. She never asks me to check in on the others. And I never ask her if they've asked about me. That unspoken pact is the most respectful silence I've ever known. One afternoon, I stopped by a used bookstore and picked up a novel titled Women Who Walked Away. The cover was cracked, the pages slightly yellowed. I read it in 3 sittings. And when I reached the final chapter, I cried, not because it was sad, but because I recognized myself, and for the first time, didn't feel sorry for the girl who left. I felt proud of her. I wanted to thank her, because she gave me this life. They say healing isn't linear, and they're right. Some days, I still flinch when my phone rings. Some days, I still wonder if Diane ever looked at that old scarf I left behind and felt anything real. Some days, I scroll past Chloe's photos, captioned with vague grief, painted with half-truths, and I almost type something. Almost, but I don't, because healing isn't the urge to correct the narrative. It's the strength to walk away from it. This apartment, with its scuffed floor and humming heater, has become my sanctuary. It doesn't pretend to be perfect. It just stays warm. It just stays mine. I've hung up old Polaroids on the wall, not of them, but of me. Claire at the bakery. Claire with coffee and sunlight on her shoulder. Claire on the library steps with a novel and a smile that isn't forced anymore. For once, I'm not documenting myself for someone else's approval. I'm capturing what I finally recognize as joy. I've stopped saying, I wish they'd understand. Because I understand now, and that's enough. Not all wounds need apologies to heal. Some just need distance, time, and the decision to no longer bleed for people who never brought bandages. I used to think forgiveness meant going back. That in order to move forward, I had to reconcile. But no, forgiveness is freedom, and sometimes, it looks like silence, like a soft goodbye no one hears but you. I've forgiven them all, but I'm not going back. I'm not rebuilding a bridge to a place I had to crawl out of. This is what freedom looks like. Not revenge, not justice served cold, but tea served warm in your favorite mug. In a place where no one raises their voice, demands your strength, or calls your peace selfish. This is what healing sounds like. Jazz on a rainy evening. Your own name, spoken kindly, by you. The silence that no longer haunts you, because now, it's filled with your own voice. I don't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Diane, not to Robert, not to Chloe, not even to the past version of me who waited at that door, hoping someone would choose her. I've already chosen her, and now, I choose me, every single day. Have you ever stopped waiting for the apology, and started living your life instead? Tell me your story in the comments. This space is for you, for the ones who loved too long, gave too much, and finally said, enough. And if this journey made you feel seen, hit subscribe. We're not just sharing stories here. We're coming home to ourselves.